Hi, everyone, and welcome to the ILP Network. I am Carmine Danisco, your co-host for today's show of Tuttle Innovation. We have a great show today. Warren and I have been talking about this. We've been waiting for this show because we're both history buffs. We love this kind of stuff, and I can't believe that we are going to be able to introduce something that I didn't even know about that existed. I'll bring Warren on. We'll talk a little bit, and then we'll bring our guest on. Hey, Warren, you over there?
I am. I'm up here in Connecticut, Carmine. Good to see you.
Yep, doing good, man. I know you're always traveling around. It's great to get you back into your home base there. What were you working on this weekend? Anything fun?
Well, I did have a side excursion to Harvard University earlier in the week where I went to to an event with the chairman of the astrophysics department. A good friend of mine wrote a book called Missile Man about his dad, who ran the nuclear ballistic missile program for the United States. So that's going to be the topic of a future show, just to give a shameless plug there. But it was quite a day up there, so it was all good.
You know, when somebody comes up to you usually, and this is the funny part about it, says, "Hey, how was your week?" You know, Warren's like one of the only guys that could say, "Oh yeah, I was talking to a guy that ran the missile program for the United States. I was at Harvard." I mean, stuff that you act like it's nothing. It's just cracks me up.
I'm easily distracted, Carmine, by bright objects. So if you call me and tell me that there's something going on at Harvard, or like this weekend, I'm going up to Woodstock, to the original grounds to see a concert up there, and just call me with something, or go to Mount Vernon, whatever it is, I'll be there. Just give me 24 hours notice.
You're one of those guys that always has a bag packed by the door. You're ready to like run out.
Never happier than when I'm on the road.
That's what's so great about the show. And when we were talking about doing this, you know, sometimes you run out of topics, or you repeat topics, or you talk about things. But with the show, we're going to be bringing on so many different things. It's going to be a lot of fun, like today's topic. And, you know, I've been kind of waiting for this show. Why don't you bring on our guest, and we'll kind of get going.
Yeah, so I want to introduce Rob Schenk, but before we get started with him, I want to just say I met Rob recently at an event in Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C., at Mount Vernon, when the U.S. Patent Office had an honorary event for the signing of the 10 millionth patent in the United States. It was a significant event. So I was really excited to go there, and I really enjoyed meeting Rob. He gave me extra time, and we'll bring him in a second and bring him up to speed. But I was so impressed with his knowledge and his background and so forth. And so let me just say, Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Warren, and thank you, Carmine. Pleasure to meet you both.
Well, I've had this show in mind for quite a while since we met, and really sharing the experience that I had with as many inventors as we can across the country who are reaching out to. But just to get started, Rob, maybe you could just, before we get into Mount Vernon and George Washington and all the historical stuff about innovation, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you got started, and how you moved into the position that you're at now.
Thanks, Warren. I'm currently the Senior Vice President for Visitor Engagement here at Mount Vernon. And so my responsibilities range everything from kind of our history interpreters and our front office, all the way to our marketing and our digital new media teams. My background's really in digital internet product development. Worked for a long time at both America Online and E-Trade, but always had a lifelong interest in history, and finally tried to merge those two things, and was able to do that at a group called the Civil War Trust. And I later came to Mount Vernon from here to do the same, and then they gave me these additional responsibilities. But I've always enjoyed innovation, and I think here at Mount Vernon it's been fun to kind of delve into that subject, even from a historical point of view.
Oh, that's so wonderful. So before we get too far into this, just very quickly for our listeners, if they want to plan a trip to Mount Vernon or learn more about it, what's the website, and how do they get in touch? How do they set something up?
Absolutely. We're located about 13 miles south of Washington, D.C. It's the original home of George and Martha Washington. It's really one of the great treasures here in the United States. And for those that haven't visited or want to learn more, you can certainly go to mountvernon.org. It's all spelled out. You'll learn a lot and see a lot. We've got a lot of great educational resources on the site as well.
Well, what really hit me, Rob, was the proximity to Washington, D.C. So if anybody is coming in for a visit to the town, or maybe, you know, the traditional visits to the Capitol and White House and stuff, it's really worthwhile to add this to your itinerary. And there's no excuse, even if you don't rent a car, grab an Uber we Ubered home. You can, it's easy to get to.
We're open 365 days a year, and we've been open for 160 plus years. So yes, we look forward to welcoming all.
Well, talk about job security there.
There you go. Long view on things here.
You know what's funny? What's funny about that is when we talk about George Washington and his house, and then we put in the word innovation, you know, it just doesn't seem to go. You don't think about innovation being back then. And really what Warren told me about this estate and the things that are there, it really was innovative, right, Lauren?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, maybe Rob, you could take us in that direction. You know, I first a little bit about George Washington as an innovator, and then we'll get into the grist mill in a second, but in a moment. But talk to us about George Washington, innovator, and what innovation meant back then in up to in the late 1700s.
Well, you're absolutely right. I think most Americans, when we think about innovation and the history of innovation in America, will think of maybe the Industrial Revolution of the late 1800s, or even more modern times, you know, invention of the personal computer and more kind of the internet developments of late. But really, it's remarkable to look back and see how even at the earliest chapters of America, there's a really great interest and focus on innovation. Washington is fascinated by technology. You see it in all of his letters. You see it in all of his activities throughout his life. You know, yes, he was a general. Yes, he was a president, a politician, but he loved being a farmer. Now, farmer doesn't always kind of signify innovator, but to Washington, it was a very innovative, science-driven pursuit. And he really looked at it as such. He not only kind of employed scientific methods to kind of develop better crop rotations, better crop usage, but he also was a great user of the most modern agricultural tools and machines. He owned systems called the hippopotamus, which somehow dragged mud out of the river as fertilizer. He used other rolling mechanisms to help prepare fields. He developed new plows and technologies. He built this treading barn, which actually was a more innovative way to tread wheat. So he's a guy who's really after technology and sees it not only as a way forward for America to be more self-sufficient and a stronger nation in terms of its own domestic manufacture and agriculture, but just also a labor savings means.
Did he develop those tools and equipment on his own? Did he work with other innovators and inventors and
more the latter. He was very plugged in, to use kind of more of a modern term. He was a correspondent with not only leading minds here in America, but also in Europe. He was constantly after innovation, and when he could kind of see it and find and acquire it, he was quick to do so. As President of the United States, he was also a very vocal proponent for innovation. It's interesting to note that in the very first State of the Union address, Washington is speaking directly to Congress and recommending that they follow through on the constitutional mandate to build a patent system or some system that would encourage domestic manufacture and innovation. So Washington, in his very first political addresses there in 1790, is saying those things.
So we were just talking to the director, Yanku, of the Patent Office, who was your star guest 2 weeks ago, and he was saying the same thing. And so we learned that the Patent Office was the second building built in Washington, D.C. after the White House, and even Thomas Jefferson was one of the early commissioners. But tell us a little bit about, I mentioned to him that it was my understanding that the grist mill in Mount Vernon was the second patent that's signed, but he corrected me and said it was actually the third. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about that early patent system and how George Washington first came across the patent and how that led to his getting involved with the grist mill there.
Well, Congress listened to Washington. They did pass the patent law, which he quickly signed into law, and he was, as mandated by that law, signing patents very early in his presidency. So he signed, I believe, around 150 patents during his presidency. So patent 1 was on the creation of potash. Real exciting subject. Patent 2 was kind of some innovative method of producing candles. You know, I'm sure that was interesting too in its own right. But patent number 3, which is one I hope we can talk about here, is the Oliver Evans automated mill system. A real interesting advancement in how to automate the milling of grain. Washington had owned his own grist mill here at Mount Vernon and was very interested, as I said, in innovation. So this patent comes to his desk for signature, number 3, and Washington quickly signs it. And then he writes a letter to some folks here at Mount Vernon, and they do eventually visit an installation on the Occoquan River just south of us that had this system. He saw it, loved it, and ordered it installed. Evans' brothers, not Oliver himself, but his brothers came and actually installed it here in 1791, and it became a part of his grist mill, and it greatly improved not only the manufacture of superfine flour, which received a price premium, but also reduced the amount of labor necessary to operate the mill.
So how did it actually work? When he ordered the mill, did they come over and build it for him, or did he license the technology?
And it's very kind of, it's not just one system, it's a whole series of transportation and subsystems used in the preparation and milling and packaging of grain. So there's all these interesting elevators and pulleys and systems moving grain products up and down through the floors into different subsystems, both cleaning, preparing, and then grinding, and then spreading, drying, and moving into packaging. So it's a complete system, and it allowed Washington to employ fewer folks at the mill, and he was always very interested in kind of automation that did that. And it's interesting throughout Washington's later life, he's always looking for labor-saving techniques and systems.
And it's an amazingly impressive place. Yeah, when you see it in person, and Rob gave us a private, tour of the place. It was, and by the way, Carmen, we're gonna bring in some B-roll. We either get that from Rob or we'll pull it off the internet to show people as we're talking here, what this contraption looks like. It's pretty.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's
3 stories, right?
We do have a virtual tour on our website. I think it's at mountvernon.org/virtual tour. And in there, you can access all the floors of the grist mill. And so you'll be able to see videos, a lot of these systems that we're talking about.
Wow.
That's amazing. So so he used the mill primarily for producing whiskey. Is that accurate, or?
No, first it was really straight up for the production of flour. So one of Washington's great cash crops, and really one of the important things that Washington does, he moves away from tobacco and moves towards grain. He sees grain as less under the control of the British government prior to the establishment of the United States, and one that would be domestically consumed and also better suited to the soil here in Virginia. So, when you grow it, the next step is you have to mill it, and kind of, Washington invests in the finest grindstones, these French burr stones that are like the BMWs of burr stones.
More like the Peugeots, I think.
That's probably in this case, that's right, a Renault comparison. But anyway, he's grinding the super fine quality flour. And so that's the flour that's getting the premium markup in the market. He's also grinding on the lesser grindstones, corn and other things which are going to be used for animal feed or other kind of domestic purposes.
And where's he selling all this? Where's he distributing and selling it? How'd the marketplace work back then?
Well, domestically, but also in some cases overseas. So Washington is selling into the local marketplaces that are growing, and so he sees this as supporting the growth of the United States. But he's also shipping grains into the Caribbean. He's also on occasion even to Europe. So he's looking at the larger marketplaces of the 18th century.
Wow, it's so fascinating. And I'm just thinking, George Washington LLC.
Yeah.
Right. But I think you have to think about, let me just point out, and maybe this is interesting to your audience, that this whole installation of the Oliver Evans system and the production efficiencies we're talking about is happening during his presidency.
I wonder if that was going on today, if there'd be any.
That's what I was wondering. So what was it under a different company? Did people know that he owned the company?
This is his business. This is what Washington does. He is a farmer. He is a self-sufficient farmer. And I think, again, we have to put ourselves back in the 18th century. They didn't really have, let's say, professional politicians in the 18th century.
Or Google. People really didn't know.
That's right. Well, you really needed your own self-sufficiency. And men, and I'll use that term here because it was in that case in the 18th century, men sought to be self-sufficient through their own economic activities.
So now were these mills being, just in terms of the context outside of Washington, around what was the 13 colonies then, were these mills built elsewhere as well? And in fact, in terms of manufacturing, were other major developments going on, not just with, say, grain, but maybe fabrics and those type of mills? Was that all flourishing at the same time, would you say?
Well, mills, flour mills, grist mills they go back to medieval times in terms of their construct, and were obviously very prevalent. They were essential parts of any sort of nation or country because they were vital towards the making of bread, if you will. So there hadn't been a whole lot of tremendous innovation in terms of mills for a long time. So Oliver Evans' system is kind of noteworthy in that regard. I think that, yes, was there innovation in other categories? Absolutely. So Washington, although this doesn't really happen during Washington's days per se, but you have the first kind of automated loom technology. So again, looms are starting to get more sophisticated, more pattern driven, which, if you know that history, kind of leads to some digital innovations much later. It's kind of on that vector. So there's some really interesting things happening in that regard too. But I can point out, going back to the thesis that the late 18th century was a far more innovative time than people give it credit for, Washington was also very active in promoting balloons and balloon flight and aerial flight. It's interesting to note that Washington issues the very first patent or actually passport, I should say, for aerial transport in the United States. He learns of the growth of balloons in France, and he writes a letter to his friends over there saying he expects his friends to arrive by balloon, not by ship. And so he's kind of looking forward to a day of aerial transportation, which been several hundred years later.
So let's just shift now, just because it's always fascinating to me. So did he get into the whiskey business as an outgrowth of all this? Was it a natural progression, or was that something cool in the day, or how did that end up happening? Because
I think that's good. And Warren, you had asked that question earlier, and yes, he does use ground grain from the grist mill in his distilling operations. Obviously, that's one of the key inputs towards a distilling operation. So Washington was late to the distilling business. It's interesting when you look at Washington's life and being the general of the Continental Army, he had seen both the benefit and the ills of alcohol. Alcohol consumption was far more prevalent in the 18th century. By the way, his prize miller, had a drinking problem.
Yeah.
Some speculate that automation was a way to kind of get around human foibles, if you will. So Washington was always wary of supplying the spirits that might cause social ills, but he also saw the benefits of it. He had a Scottish farm manager who convinced him that he had all the right necessary inputs to enter this business. He is first trepidatious about it, but he actually builds his first 2 stills in his cooperage and gives it a try. So thinking about, failing fast or trying, innovative techniques, he's not all in, he's going to try it. And so he gets these stills up and running, produces the whiskey, puts it in barrels and sends it off the market, and the money comes right back. Now, again, also in the 18th century, most of Washington's products, it takes a long time to get the cash back. You got to send it to the Caribbean. That's weeks and weeks of transport time. But whiskey went from the still into the barrel, onto the wagon, up to Alexandria, and the cash came right back. And that impressed Washington to a great degree. So in true Washingtonian fashion, he doubles down and builds a really fantastic, much more capacious distillery, which had 5 copper pot stills in it, a full, floor designed to kind of support whiskey production. And by 1799, the last year of his life, he's producing 11,000 gallons of whiskey and other spirits, which would at the time make him one of the largest whiskey distillers in the United States. And again, for your audience, let me point out, he enters the whiskey business as an entrepreneur after he is president of the United States. He's not playing golf. He's not, fox hunting. He's not on the speaker's circuit. He is inventing a brand new business that actually becomes one of his most profitable businesses too.
Yeah, that's what you had said, and so it is amazing because when you think of George Washington, he's really the father of the country. We had such amazing founding fathers, and I just finished the biography on Hamilton and obviously Adams, and they're all bright. But there's something about George Washington. He was sort of the Babe Ruth of is the baseball, when he was in the country. So I'm sure when he took the lead on something like this, probably from a marketing perspective, he was pretty well known, right? It was pretty easy for him to make connections and get in business, right?
Absolutely. Although it is interesting to note that by this stage, whiskey's not bottled. It's not labeled in the way that we see it from a modern branding point of view. So you wouldn't find George Washington's whiskey as a brand. It simply was a commodity product put into barrels and sold into the marketplace and sold in an unbranded way. It wasn't even aged because there was no marketplace for aged spirits, which is something that's very prevalent today. Maybe speaking to what the spirits drinking habits were of the 18th century, they just wanted it and wanted it in great quantities.
Wow. Well, let's just tack a little bit here because this is amazingly fascinating, and thanks, Rob, for all your knowledge and sharing this with us. But so you hosted an event a couple of weeks ago for the signing of the 10 millionth patent. So we're going to jump from the founding of the country, which was founded, right in technology and from day one and patents and so forth, to the modern day. First of all, tell us a little bit about what you had to do to pull that whole event together, because it was pretty massive, and some of the people there were very impressive.
Well, we do a lot of great events here at Mount Vernon, so we're not unaccustomed to putting on events. We did get introduced to the U.S. Patent and Trade Office, and we had a conversation with them. They had said that they were looking for a venue for this event, and I immediately thought of the third patent, that Oliver Evans patent, thinking of Washington as the first signer of patents. I thought, this would be the natural place, I know my point of view, but the natural place to celebrate the 10 millionth patent at the home of the president who signed the first patents. And we were able to bring the U.S. Patent and Trade Office folks out and showed them the grist mill and showed them the working Oliver Evans system. I think, like we all have, they fell in love with it and kind of immediately saw that as the venue for the event. So, Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross was there, again, all the chiefs of the U.S. Patent and Trade Office, members of Congress, and it was a really exciting and wonderful event. And Warren, I appreciate you being there as well. And I think it was a lot of fun just to be able to share that history with the bigger audience and connect, our first president with our latest and kind of all the efforts and innovations since then.
Well, you had an amazing array of guests, like you said, Wilbur Ross. Senator Chris Coons was there, who's been terrific for inventors in the patent system. Darrell Issa, the congressman, and so forth. So it was fun to go around and speak to all of them. What do you think George Washington would say today, though? He came back quickly. 10 million patents. Would he be? He would be probably pretty shocked under any circumstances, but. Something tells me also that he would adjust pretty quickly and say, hey, that's where we always intended it to go. What do you think?
I definitely think the latter. I definitely think he would be so impressed and so pleased as to the innovative history of the United States of America. And I think his words there in that first State of the Union, and to see the fruit of that, he would love that. And I know as a president, he would continue to be a supporter of innovation and American manufacturing prowess.
Yeah. Hey, Rob, real quick question I have is, we always hear about George Washington, prior, before he became president and after. What about in his younger years? Did he show this entrepreneurial things that he was going to be this business guy? Or, did it just happen? Or, was he like this, earlier on in his years, or do we know?
Well, yeah, Carmen, I think, when I spoke of kind of his agricultural focus and his scientific methods of focusing on agricultural output, that happens at a very early age. And you see him being methodical, doing tests. He's, even creates boxes where he's trying different manures and different grains to see which one will grow. And so he's really employing modern scientific methods to figure out how to get the maximum yield. So that's happening at a pretty early age. So I would say likely yes.
Wow.
Now, did he use that? Did he have that same approach in the military? We always know him as a leader of men, but was he always trying to get his hands on the best equipment, or probably their resources were limited, but I'm wondering from that perspective, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, the resources certainly were limited. And I think, Washington was always grateful for any weaponry and supplies that he could get his hands on. It was certainly touch and go. And so it was a more difficult environment, I would say, to innovate in from a materials point of view. Washington learns many hard lessons during the American Revolution. He's defeated quite significantly the Battle of Long Island and all the way down before he crosses the Delaware famously. And so Washington's learning from his defeats. He's learning from the setbacks. And again, he adopts a strategy, which is to not put all the chips on the table, to not risk the all or nothing battle. So again, if I put it kind of in innovator terms, he wants to be around to continue to learn fast and kind of be ever more successful. When at Valley Forge, that terrible winter, they invest a lot in training. They bring in European military experts to teach drill and to kind of instill tighter discipline and effectiveness, and that pays off in the later years of the war.
That's interesting. That is a theme. He tests, see what the results are, and then moves on depending upon the success of it.
That's right. Very much so.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, Carmine, do you have any other questions? I've been so fascinated with this. So you're going all day, but I know we have a half hour.
Yeah, we have still a few minutes left. Real quick, I mean, Rob, you as running this facility, I love history, but you probably get some people there that when they first get there, they could care less. But when they start hearing the stories and the background and what's happening, I mean, you just must see their faces light up because it is so interesting, right?
Well, absolutely. And Carmen, great point, because as I said, most people know Washington as president and they might know him as general. I had a group of Silicon Valley executives and they looked like they didn't want to be at Mount Vernon. And we took them into the grist mill and the distillery and we started talking about the topics we were talking about today. And also you could see the light bulbs going off. And you could see also we were making a connection to a community that might not otherwise have had the natural interest. And so it's always fun to expose people to that's part of Washington's life and history. And I also would say being in the whiskey business, and I should point out that our distillery at Mount Vernon actually does produce whiskey using 18th century methods,
wow,
using the general's recipe. And when you can offer someone a taste of some very fine whiskey and say that this derives from Washington's own business, believe me, there's a whole different audience you can tap into.
Yeah. Oh, I believe it. And that's what makes it so much fun is that, you guys are really you're not recreating, you're keeping it alive exactly how it was done. And that's what I just love about it. I mean, it's such a gorgeous, I'm looking at your website. It's such a gorgeous grounds. I mean, how could just walking around, people are probably just excited to do that.
People are super inspired. Some of the most amazing, iconic views in America. And again, if you haven't been to Mount Vernon, I always invite you to come. And you haven't been in a while, there's a lot of new attractions and features that we'd love to share with you. We're always looking for innovative ways to share the story of Washington with audiences, both here and via our digital assets and our website. So it's a very content-rich website, a lot of offerings there to consider if you're not at Mount Vernon today.
No, it's just awesome. That's great. I myself, I mean, I've been up to DC several times, never really thought about it. And it's not that far away. Just to get out of the city, take a ride. I mean, you could spend the day there.
You can, and there's a lot more to see than just that house. So I mentioned the grist mill and the distillery site are about 3 miles away from the core part of the estate. And yes, that was still part of Washington's land because here in Mount Vernon, he had more than 8,000 acres. So, but we still have the area where the grist mill and distillery are. They're both working sites, but we have a great museum and education center, working pioneer farm, lots of other things to see. So really, I think it catches some people by surprise, the array of things you can do here.
I think they gave Washington land like big companies give out options, right?
Well, they did early on because they didn't have a whole lot of cash. So that's how Washington comes into a lot of land, particularly out in the Ohio Valley.
Yeah, and I know we ended the Revolutionary War with about $25 million in debt, which in today's money would be XYZ. But it's amazing how these guys, what they did to pull out of it. No,
that's how the land was purchased back then. That's how it was just kind of awarded, or how was that done?
It was pretty prevalent. Again, there wasn't a whole lot of hard cash to be had in America prior to the creation of the United States of America. So typically what you saw, a lot of arrangements, particularly for those who had participated in military campaigns, was to grant the soldiers land.
Oh,
Oftentimes at the fringes of the frontier,
Yep.
which had the double benefit of not only giving the soldiers some form of material compensation, but also encouraging westward migration.
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of the war vets picked, and some of the officers took big chunks today. They were
That's right.
pretty valuable today. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Well, Rob, thank you so much for being on the show today. I would love to, if Warren's okay with it, ask you back on down the road. I'd love to hear what's going on and things that are happening. It's just so interesting. I just think that our listeners, once they start getting into this, they'll really be interested in.
Yeah, we're gonna tie. Of course, this will be a standalone interview, but also tie some of the highlights into some of the things that Director Yanku said, and some of our inventors in the DC area that are alive and well today, and what's going on sort of politically with the patents. So it's going to be a fun mix, and we'll get some B-roll so people can see it, and hopefully everybody who's listening will put Mount Vernon on their schedule and make sure they visit.
Well, he was one of the great supporters of our nation and supporters of innovators today. So we would love to welcome all here to Mount Vernon.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Warren,
Yeah,
thanks.
Rob, thank you so much for being on. And for any of you listeners, please go on out to mountvernon.org and take a look around. It's a great place to visit. If you can, please go on out to iTunes or Google Play. Leave us a review. Leave us a rating. Would be awesome for you to tell us, let us know how we're doing. And also what else you'd like to hear about on the show. We really would like to hear your feedback. Warren and I appreciate you being on today, and we will catch you next time on Tuttle Innovations.